The last person to see Margaret Welch alive was a woman named Carol Dietrich. Carol was the school's vice principal. She was standing near the front entrance at 3:47 in the afternoon on Friday, October 14th, 1994. She saw Margaret push through the double doors and walk toward the parking lot. She was carrying a canvas tote bag over her left shoulder. She was wearing a gray blazer. That detail matters. Carol remembered the blazer specifically because Margaret had complimented Carol on a similar one the week before. Details stick for a reason. Margaret's car was a 1991 Honda Accord, burgundy, license plate registered to her home address in Palmetto County. At 7:04 p.m. that same Friday evening, a deputy with the county sheriff's office noticed the car sitting at the Shell gas station on Route 9, engine off, driver's door unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. Margaret's purse was on the passenger seat. Her wallet was in the purse. Her cash was in the wallet. Nothing was disturbed. There were no signs of a struggle in or around the vehicle. The deputy ran the plates and got her address. He drove to her house. No answer. He left a card. The call that triggered a full missing persons report came from her sister, Patricia Welch Novak, on Saturday morning at 9:12 a.m. Patricia lived 40 minutes away. She told the detective on the phone that Margaret never missed their Saturday morning call. They had done it every Saturday for 11 years. When the phone rang through to the answering machine twice in a row, Patricia got in her car. She arrived at Margaret's house at 9:48 a.m. She used her spare key to get inside. Margaret's weekend bag was on the bed, half-packed. There were groceries on the counter, milk that would spoil by Monday. Within 72 hours, the department had assembled a team and issued a public appeal. Television stations ran Margaret's photograph that Sunday evening. Tip lines received 217 calls in the first week. Investigators interviewed 43 people. They spoke to her colleagues, her neighbors, her students, her former students, a man she had briefly dated. They pulled her phone records. They reviewed her finances. They found nothing that looked like a threat. What they found instead was an ex-boyfriend, Thomas Aldridge, with whom Margaret had ended a 2-year relationship in the spring of 1994. Aldridge had a temper. 2 of Margaret's friends had mentioned him in their statements. The investigation pivoted hard in his direction. Thomas Aldridge was in Cincinnati, Ohio, on October 14, 1994. He had flown there Thursday morning for a professional conference. He was photographed at the conference reception on the evening of the 14th. His hotel keycard logged him entering his room at 11:43 p.m. His alibi was verified within 10 days. The investigation did not collapse, but it lost its center of gravity. It drifted. And while investigators were doing background work on a man 400 miles away, no one made a list of who had a master key to Palmetto County High School. No one asked who was in that building after 4 p.m. on a Friday. That question was never formally asked. Not in 1994. Not in any document I have been able to locate. My name is Danny Cruz. I spent 12 years covering courts and crime for the Miami Herald and the Tampa Bay Times. I left traditional journalism because editors kill stories. I kept the files. That is what this channel is. It is the files. It is the interviews that never ran. It is the documents that were buried in public records requests or sitting in archive boxes that nobody opened for 20 years, or attached to case files that got transferred to cold storage and forgotten. I do not have a badge. I have documents. And the documents on this case are something I have spent the better part of the last 6 months working through. What I am going to tell you is sourced. Every name, every date, every detail you are about to hear comes from documents that exist. If you want to follow this kind of work, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Cases like this one deserve people paying attention. That is what subscribers do. They pay attention. Let's continue. Margaret Eleanor Welch was 38 years old when she disappeared. She had been teaching English at Palmetto County High School for 11 years. By all accounts, she was a fixture of the place. Former students talked about her in the way people talk about teachers who genuinely changed something in them. She ran the school literary magazine for 7 of those 11 years. She organized the annual reading competition. She stayed after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays to help students with essays, without extra pay, without recognition, just because she thought it mattered. Colleagues described her as organized, punctual, warm but not soft. The kind of person who showed up and did the work. The last class she taught that Friday was fifth period, an 11th grade honors English class. 18 students. They were working through Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. One of those students, a boy named David Carver, would later tell his own son about that class. He remembered Margaret writing a passage from the book on the chalkboard. He remembered she was excited about the discussion. He remembered she stayed a few minutes after the bell, erasing the board, while the students filed out. That was the last time anyone in that classroom saw her. David Carver's son would eventually become a significant figure in this story, but we are not there yet. At 3:47 p.m., Carol Dietrich saw Margaret exit the building. At 7:04 p.m., the deputy found her car at the Shell station. That is a 3-hour and 17-minute window. The Shell station is 1.8 miles from the school. There is no verified sighting of Margaret Welch in that window. One motorist claimed to have seen a woman matching her description walking along Route 9 sometime between 5 and 6 p.m. That witness recanted the following week, saying he was no longer certain of what he saw. The gap between 3:47 and 7:04 p.m. was never adequately explained. No surveillance footage of the gas station was ever recovered by investigators. The station's third-party camera was mounted above the fuel pumps. It recorded on a 30-day loop. No one requested that footage before the loop expired. The investigation was led by Detective Frank Ramirez of the Palmetto County Sheriff's Office. Ramirez was experienced. He had 12 years on the job by 1994. His interviews were thorough. His documentation, based on what I have reviewed, was solid professional police work. But the investigation suffered from two structural problems from almost the beginning. First, the pivot to Thomas Aldridge consumed resources during the critical early weeks. Second, the school itself was treated primarily as a scene to be canvassed for witnesses, not as a physical location to be interrogated. Who had access? Who had keys? Who was unaccounted for on Friday afternoon? Those questions appear, but they are not pursued with the same intensity as the Aldridge angle. By early 1995, with no suspect, no physical evidence, and no body, the case was functionally stalled. It would never fully recover momentum. Cold cases do not die in a single moment. They die by accumulation. A lead gets cold and isn't replaced. A witness moves away and a new address is never tracked down. A key document gets misfiled. An anniversary passes without a press release from the department. Then another anniversary. Then another. The world moves on because the world always moves on, and the people left behind are left behind in a very particular kind of silence that is hard to describe unless you have sat across from them at a table and listened to them talk. Detective Frank Ramirez retired from the Palmetto County Sheriff's Office in August 2001. He cited health reasons. By that point, the Welch case had been reassigned twice. Ramirez told a reporter for the local paper, in a brief interview published the week of his retirement, that the Welch case was the one that stayed with him. He said he believed there was someone local who knew what happened. He said he hoped someone would eventually come forward. He never gave another interview about the case on record. He passed away in 2013. In the spring of 2004, the case file was transferred from active storage to the county archive facility. Margaret's sister Patricia received a form letter informing her of the transfer. It said the transfer did not mean the case was closed. It meant resources had been redirected. Patricia understood what that meant. She had been calling the department every October since 1995. She called on the anniversary of the disappearance. She called to make sure someone still knew Margaret's name was in a file somewhere. By 2004, she had made 10 of those calls. She would go on to make 28 of them in total. 28 calls over 28 years, one for every October she lived without an answer. James Carver was 8 years old in October 1994. His father, David Carver, was the student from Margaret's fifth period honors English class, the one who remembered her writing the Hurston passage on the chalkboard. David talked about Margaret over the years, the way parents sometimes talk about things that marked them when they were young. He talked about how she had encouraged him to write. He talked about her disappearing, and how the school had put a photograph of her in the lobby for a while, and how the photograph eventually came down. James grew up with Margaret Welch as a name in the family's memory, not a ghost story, just a name attached to a particular weight. By 2023, James Carver was 37 years old and working as a paralegal at a firm in the county. He had no professional obligation to look at the Welch case. He did it because he had grown up with the name. In early 2023, he filed a formal public records request with the Palmetto County Sheriff's Office for the Welch case file. The request was processed over several months. When the file arrived, it was substantial. James spent his evenings going through it. He was not a detective. He was not a journalist. He was a paralegal with document skills and a personal reason to pay attention. And in that file, he found something that Detective Ramirez's team had apparently not connected. The name Raymond Solis appeared in the file exactly once. Solis was listed as a school employee, a custodial staff member, in a general canvass of school personnel conducted in the first weeks of the investigation. He was noted as having been unavailable for an interview during the initial canvass period. There is a notation indicating he would be followed up with. There is no subsequent interview document in the file. His name does not appear again. What the case file did not contain, but what existed in the school district's own employment records was this. Raymond Solis held a master key to the building. He was the evening and weekend custodian. He was dismissed from his position in February 1995, approximately 4 months after Margaret Welch disappeared, for undisclosed cause. His employment file was maintained by the school district's Human Resources Department. That department was in the same county government complex as the sheriff's office. The employment file was never requested as part of the investigation. James Carver contacted Patricia Welch Novak after he had spent several weeks reviewing the file. He wanted to tell her carefully. He did not have answers. He had a gap, a name, a thread. Patricia listened. She told him she appreciated that he called. She told him she had spent 29 years not knowing if Margaret was alive somewhere, or dead somewhere, or simply gone in a way that defied explanation. She asked James to keep looking. He filed additional records requests. He wrote letters to the county school board. And in September 2023, the school board approved a renovation project for the gymnasium at Palmetto County High School. The approval had nothing to do with James Carver or the Welch case. It was a facilities decision. The gym floor was 40 years old. The subfloor drainage was failing. Construction was scheduled to begin in March 2024. The renovation crew arrived on the morning of March 4, 2024. The job was a full floor replacement. The old concrete slab had to come up. On March 6th, at approximately 10:20 in the morning, a worker operating a jackhammer encountered an irregular void beneath the concrete near the north wall of the gymnasium. The void was not large. The worker stopped and flagged the site supervisor. The site supervisor examined the area, saw what he believed to be non-construction material, and called the school principal. The principal called the county. Within 3 hours, the site was treated as a potential crime scene. The Palmetto County Sheriff's Office contacted the Forensic Anthropology Unit at the State University that same afternoon. A team arrived the following morning. The concrete removal was handled as an excavation from that point forward. The process was slow and deliberate. They were working in sections, recording everything. The work took 11 days. What they recovered in that space beneath the gym floor was a set of skeletal remains, nearly complete, in a condition consistent with approximately 30 years of burial beneath sealed concrete. Alongside the remains, investigators found 2 items that had survived the burial conditions. The first was a laminated badge, a school-issued ID badge. The photograph on the badge was Margaret Welch. The second item was a silver bracelet, thin chain link, with a small heart-shaped charm. The charm was engraved. Patricia Welch Novak had described that bracelet to detectives in 1994. She had given Margaret the bracelet for her 35th birthday. DNA samples were sent to the state lab on March 17th. Comparative DNA analysis using a sample contributed by Patricia was completed on April 2, 2024. The results confirmed what the badge and the bracelet had already told anyone paying attention. Margaret Eleanor Welch had been buried beneath the gymnasium floor of the school where she had taught for 11 years. She had been there for approximately 30 years. She had been there while students played basketball above her, while pep rallies were held, while teachers walked across that floor every day for 3 decades. James Carver was the one who called Patricia to tell her the DNA had come back. He did not know exactly how to make that call. He had thought about it for days, knowing the results were coming. When Patricia answered, James told her as clearly and directly as he could. Patricia already knew. in the way that people sometimes know things they have been preparing themselves to know for a long time. She thanked him. She told him Margaret would have liked him. That was what she said. I want to be precise about what the institutional failure in this case actually looks like, because it is not one dramatic mistake. It is a series of ordinary failures that, taken together, produced a result that allowed a killer 30 years of freedom and denied a family 30 years of answers. Here is what the documents show. Raymond Solis held a master key to the building. He was the evening custodian. He had unsupervised access to the entire facility after 4 p.m. on weekdays and throughout the weekend. He was listed in the initial canvass of school employees as unavailable for interview. There is a follow-up notation. There is no follow-up interview. The case file does not contain any documentation indicating that investigators ever spoke to Raymond Solis. His employment file, which would have established his access and his duties, was never formally requested. 4 months after Margaret disappeared, Solis was terminated. His termination file noted misconduct. The specific nature of that misconduct is redacted in the documents I received, but the file exists. It was in the same county government complex as the investigation. No one pulled it. The gas station footage. The Shell station on Route 9 had an operational third-party camera in October 1994. That camera recorded on a 30-day loop. Investigators were aware of the camera. It is referenced in an early case document. The document notes that the footage should be requested. There is no follow-up document indicating the footage was ever retrieved. The 30-day window expired. Whatever that camera recorded on October 14, 1994, is gone. The case closed around Thomas Aldridge and never reopened to look elsewhere. Aldridge was the right person to look at given the information investigators had in the first week. But once his alibi was confirmed, the file shows a kind of investigative inertia. The next logical question, who else had means and access, was not pursued with equivalent energy. The master key list, the after-hours access log, the specific movements of building staff on Friday, October 14. These threads exist in the file as notations. They do not exist as completed follow-through. I do not have a badge. I have documents. And the documents say someone didn't do their job. What happened to Raymond Solis after February 1995 is something investigators are currently working to determine. As of the time I am recording this, Solis has not been publicly named as a suspect or person of interest by the Palmetto County Sheriff's Office. The case has been reopened as an active homicide investigation. The Sheriff's Office issued a brief statement in April 2024 confirming the identification of the remains and announcing the reopening. They have not provided further public comment. I will continue filing records requests. I will continue updating this case as documents become available. What I want you to understand about this case is not just the horror of what happened to Margaret Welch. I want you to understand the architecture of how a secret survives. It survives through small institutional failures. It survives because a follow-up never happened, because a tape expired, because a file sat in an archive and no one opened it for 20 years until a paralegal named James Carver did it because he grew up hearing his father talk about a teacher he remembered. The system was not corrupt in some grand conspiratorial sense. It was inattentive. And inattention over 30 years looks exactly like a cover-up, even when it is not. That is the lesson of this case. That is the thing that keeps me doing this work. Patricia Welch Novak is 71 years old. She made 28 calls to the Palmetto County Sheriff's Office over 28 Octobers. She never stopped. She is not a public figure. She is not a crusader. She is a sister who refused to let a name become just a name. Margaret Welch taught honors English at a public high school in a county most people have never heard of. She was buried under the gym floor for 30 years. She deserved better than what the system gave her. James Carver thought so too, and sometimes that is enough. One person, one file, one records request. Sometimes that is what breaks it open. What cold case has stayed with you? Drop it in the comments below. Tell me the name. Tell me the year. Tell me what you know. I read every comment. Some of the best leads I have ever followed came from this community. If you know something about a case that has gone cold, say it. Names matter. Details matter. The official story is a lie more often than you would believe, but the documents are always out there. You just have to be willing to look. My name is Danny Cruz. I kept the files. I will keep looking, and I will keep telling you what I find. Subscribe if you are not already. This work continues next week.